Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This is going to be my breakdown of the new Marvel Sony Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man 4 announcement that they just made. Is the best possible news, big surprise that we could have gotten this past week. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. There's going to be a lot of Spider-Man stuff happening this summer and later this year.
Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes.
If you didn't see the news, recently Disney, Marvel, and Sony's top film bosses were part of a big roundtable discussion about the industry, and obviously they talked a lot about the inside baseball of the Spider-Man Marvel-Sony sharing deal. So I'll play this clip of them talking about it, where they discuss what's going to happen with the future of Spider-Man beyond their new sharing deal. They get really verbose with it, but it's actually really cool.
So would you trade Spider-Man for every Leo DiCaprio movie for the rest of his life?
I'd love to have both.
Who's he negotiating with?
I'd love that.
Alan, you and Tom recently had a little business dispute over Spider-Man. And I'm curious, what was the one thing that, above everything else, brought it to...
I would say that...
There were some reports that Tom Holland got involved, like speaking of stars.
Tom Holland spoke to Bob Iger at D23, but they liked the fact that the MCU and Marvel Cinematic Universe and Kevin Feige were involved. And we heard feedback out there that suggested joining forces once again was probably really a good idea for that part of the world that's most important, which is the fan base.
Do you think this is something that will continue after this next movie?
I hope so.
Because you've shown you can do Spider-Man without Disney on the animated film.
Yes, we have. But I agree with my distinguished colleague from the other side of the aisle that I think this was a classic win-win-win. I think it was a win for Sony. Yeah. I think it was a win for Disney. And I think it was a win for the fans and moviegoers. And the only thing I would say about it is that, you know, news cycles and the rhythm of negotiations do not necessarily overlap. Right. And I think that this is, in the words of Shakespeare, a consummation devoutly to be wished, and I think we would have gotten there. And the news got ahead of some things. But I agree with that. I think it's an example of the kind of terrific collegiality that you sort of see around this table, and that we had. We had 2 films and 4 years of a terrific relationship with Disney and an excellent creative partnership. And I could just say that, you know, we're very, very excited. And July of 2021 coming to a theater near you.
So just breaking all that down, top 5 WTF style, starting with number 5. First big thing, that was Tom Rothman, head of Sony Pictures, the person in charge of all their movies, and Alan Horn, who's Kevin Feige's boss and head of all of Disney's films from all their brands. They were the ones last year that were sparring for control of Spider-Man when you heard the deal fall out and all the news outlets started reporting that Spider-Man was out of the MCU. It started with those 2 guys. We all saw what happened. They even joke about how the news got ahead of them, finishing their negotiations. But then, obviously, what happened after that is that they took it up a notch, and Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, who's Alan Horn's boss, worked with the CEO of Sony, who's this guy's boss, to work out a new sharing deal. And the new Spider-Man sharing deal is for 2 more movies with Marvel, including Spider-Man 3, which Tom Rothman there at the end of his little discussion shouts out the end, saying, "Coming July 2021 to a theater near you." They're actually starting to film Spider-Man 3 later this summer, so of course I'll be doing videos about that later this year. But the second Marvel movie that's part of the new deal is just a mystery movie that they'll cross Spider-Man over into. Everyone's hoping for Fantastic Four, but we'll see. It could wind up being the new Sinister 6 movie that they just started teasing. But it does not include Spider-Man 4. That's right, Sony plans on having a 4th Spider-Man solo film with Tom Holland, but they haven't said what that's going to be, obviously, because we don't even know what the full title of Spider-Man 3 is going to be yet. But number 4, WTF. In case you missed the moment where they talk about it during the clip, Tom Rothman at Sony says that they're basically going to re-sign another new sharing deal with Marvel after the current one expires after the next 2 Spider-Man appearances, meaning that Spider-Man 4 will be a Marvel movie inside the MCU with Tom Holland and potentially Avengers 5 or some other mega team-up crossover movie during Marvel Phase 5. You just kind of assume that Spider-Man is going to show up during Avengers movies, but Avengers 5 isn't going to be happening for at least 4 or 5 more years, so there's other really big crossover movies that'll probably happen before that. He references Shakespeare when he's talking about it. He gets very verbose with it, but the way he talks about continuing to renew their sharing deal with Marvel, the important takeaway is that it means Spider-Man is going to stay at Marvel indefinitely, which I think is good news for everyone that's hoping for some really big comic book, big crossover stories. You want a comic book accurate Avengers Secret Wars movie with a symbiote saga setup that's accurate to the Spider-Man comics? They can do that now. They can plan for that now because Sony is basically saying, yeah, we'll just continue to re-sign sharing deals with Marvel for Spider-Man indefinitely. Obviously, there's an asterisk there, like what is Sony going to get out of this? They're obviously going to keep asking for more. They'll keep battling over the terms of the deal. So number 3, what does Marvel have to give Sony in exchange for keeping Spider-Man in the MCU forever? There's 2 sides to this. Marvel gets to keep Spider-Man pretty much forever, which is great, but what does Sony get besides the money from the box office profits on Spider-Man movies? We actually just saw the best example of this in the new Morbius trailer. Michael Keaton's Vulture character from Spider-Man Homecoming showing up in a cameo scene during Morbius talking about things that happened in the MCU. A lot of people saw that last month and prematurely assumed that meant that Morbius and tangentially Venom 2 were now kind of MCU by association because of this Tom Holland Spider-Man crossover stuff that Sony is teasing. But that's not totally accurate. Morbius and Venom 2 aren't totally in the MCU. They're part of what Sony is considering their own cinematic universe. You think of it as the Spider-Verse is probably the best way to call it. So Morbius and Venom 2 aren't totally in the MCU, but they will be referencing a lot of MCU history because of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Kevin Feige kind of said it when they announced their new sharing deal for Spider-Man 3 in the mystery movie. He said Spider-Man is one of the few characters that has the ability to jump between cinematic universes. So it's probably best to think of the Sony Spider-Verse as being its own sort of multiverse off to the side, its own layer of reality. Technically not MCU, but associated with MCU stuff. Number 2, WTF. What does that all mean, and will Venom ever show up in the MCU? That was one of the biggest questions after the first Venom movie. Is he ever going to show up in the MCU with Spider-Man just because Venom is such a popular character? Before all the Spider-Man Marvel Sony drama last year, Sony technically wasn't allowed to reference any Marvel MCU stuff during its Spider-Man spin-off movies. Like, that's why you didn't see a ton of Spider-Man stuff happening during the first Venom movie. The new sharing deal changes that, though. That's why you saw the Spider-Man in the MCU stuff happening in the Morbius trailer. But you're never going to see Iron Man or Captain America inside one of these Sony Spider-Man spin-off movies like Morbius. But just because Spider-Man was part of Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, Sony is allowed to reference anything that they want from those movies in their Spider-Verse movies. So during the Morbius movie, they can reference the blip. During Venom 2, they can reference Thanos and the Snap, Avengers Infinity War. The new deal also creates a path for more shared characters besides Tom Holland's Spider-Man, talking about the new version of J. Jonah Jameson. Establishing more concrete rules about who gets to use what characters. Think about it this way, they just introduced the Morbius vampire character. Marvel announced that they were going to do a Blade reboot movie with Mahershala Ali. Sony probably wants to see Blade and Morbius cross over in a movie at some point. But for the most part, MCU is still considered to be a separate universe of movies from the Sony Spider-Verse movies. It's just that you'll see them referencing a lot of MCU stuff in the Sony Spider-Verse movies. Maybe long-term, in a very special Spider-Man-specific Tom Holland film, then we could see Venom show up in an MCU Spider-Man solo film. Number 1 WTF, obviously, though. This confirms Spider-Man 4 is going to be a Marvel movie in the MCU, but when is that going to happen, and what's the story of that movie going to be, and what's going to happen with the Sinister 6 movie that the Sony people keep teasing? Well, based on the Morbius Easter eggs we've been seeing on the set of that movie in the comments from John Watts, the director of Spider-Man 3, all the Spider-Man solo films, saying that he wanted Kraven to be the main villain of Spider-Man 3, sounds like Spider-Man 3 will mostly be him on the run, John Wick 3 style, with maybe Kraven the Hunter or other Spider-Man villains trying to chase him down the whole time till he stands his ground. Since they've been releasing these solo Spider-Man films, Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home, Spider-Man 3, like clockwork every 2 years, we can probably assume Spider-Man 4 will be released July 2023, and by that time there'll be enough other Spider-Man spin-off movies like Venom 2, the new Mystery Spider-Man movie they announced for October 2021 that we're all still guessing about. They'll have enough time to have established more of their Sinister 6 team. But 2023 is a long ways off. That's plenty of time to introduce other core Sinister 6 characters like a new Dr. Octopus. But let me know in the comments, do you want them to do Spider-Man 4 as their full-blown Sinister 6 movie, or do you want that to be a different movie after Spider-Man 4? There's going to be a whole lot of Spider-Man stuff happening real soon. That doesn't even include all the Venom Maximum Carnage stuff that they're setting up with the Venom movies. There is a new Avengers Infinity Saga Spider-Man deleted scene that I'll probably post in the next couple of days, but there'll be a bunch of Spider-Man 3, Venom 2, and Morbius stuff happening really soon. If you have any video requests, just let me know in the comments below. Everyone, click here for my new Venom 2 Carnage teaser video, and click here for my new Avengers Infinity Saga deleted scene. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody stay awesome. This is the way.